Yeah, thanks again for having me, and special thanks again for the whole organizing crew. It's been really lovely so far. My name is Yasmina Banaszczuk, but you all can call me Mina because that's what most people call me anyways. Earlier this year, I finished my PhD in business economics and network theory. And when I say network theory, I mean how personal contacts and personal networks, like the people we know, how they work and how that influences our life. And I hope that I can give you some news, some info on how our personal networks or our contacts influence hiring in tech and how that relates to your everyday life. If we're lucky, I have some time left after the slides, and maybe we can do a quick Q&A. If not, feel free to find me in the break. Well, you can try fight me, but you can feel free to find me during one of the breaks, or just let me know if you have any questions on Twitter. My DMs are also open. So when it comes to hiring, who of you has ever seen one of those tweets that went like, "I'm looking for a position in X"? Okay, and who of you has ever gotten a job through a contact or recommended a contact for a job? I hope you all saw that, because that's, I would estimate, about 80% of the room, which is incredibly high. And when we talk about hiring through networks, I labeled it a little bit provocatively, the fast and the obvious. Tech moves rather quickly. Companies start up very frequently. They grow, they fade away, they merge, they get sold. But what they all have in common is that they need talent. They need good people at the core of it. I mean, we heard many talks about how important it is to have good teams, to have good people come together and create something. But we all also know that hiring processes take time and effort. And often your company doesn't really have either available. So many people rely on their personal contacts to either find a good candidate or to quickly find just some candidate. Or even to find a good position for themselves. But what does that really mean in terms of getting the right person for the job, or the best suitable person for the job? Is hiring through personal contacts or networks, is it really a facilitating technique, or maybe even hindering any diversity efforts that you're trying to create or maintain? And that's what I want to discuss today. So when talking about this, it's important to remind ourselves of what functions networks can provide. And generally in my research, I researched for a few years on how people enter jobs after their university degrees. So I interviewed a lot of people, talked about them, how they got into their jobs through contacts, etc. And there are three main functions that personal networks have for people, and those are support, motivation, and feedback. What does that mean? Well, support can be emotional, technical, or professional. Motivation can mean that someone cheers you up when you have a bad day, someone has your back. It can even prolong the time before you burn out if you really have a very horrible position that you're working at. Maybe motivation from friends or colleagues or family can give you enough strength to find another position before you really have to stop what you're doing. And feedback, I mean, we heard a talk about feedback earlier today, which was nice. So feedback can be active or passive, and it can be from application forms, CV design, to actually what you're doing on your daily basis, your technical tasks, the workload you have, how you handle that, any interpersonal skills, any soft skills, how they're called. But what's really important with those three factors is that they overlap so much. And they vary vastly from the kind of contacts you have. So you may have some friends who are great at motivating you, but they can't explain anything for you from technical aspects. On the other way, you may have friends or family who can give you great advice on how to do your job, but they suck at motivating. So it's really important that you remind yourself that your network consists of these different spheres that sometimes overlap and sometimes are so separate from each other that they barely touch. Yet at the same time, when talking about networks, what's often something that people find out is that networks are very different, work very differently for some groups of people than for others. For some people, networks or contacts are very efficient, very effective when it comes to their career, and for others, it doesn't work at all. Their networks are basically useless. And one of the reasons is that when you find applicants through your networks, you run into a few challenges. And I can summarize the challenge basically with one word, and that's bias. First off, the contacts that you find through your, well, or the candidates that you find through your own contacts, they are, like the people who recommend you a person, they are probably very biased. And that links to how competence of a person is perceived. The perceived competence of a person correlates highly with a few minor factors like gender, race, social origin, physical abilities, weight, even names. In Germany, for example, there are some names, like, for example, Kevin, that have a very negative connotation nowadays. And I taught some, sorry for anyone who's named Kevin. Hate to break it to you, but because in Germany, those names are linked or perceived to be of lower social classes, and thus unfairly linked to lower intelligence. I taught at a university of newly becoming teachers, and when I asked them, like, who are your most intelligent and who are your least intelligent people in the class, the most intelligent ones were usually called Alexander or something, and the least intelligent ones, Kevin. And of course, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Kevin. Should have made something up, I'm sorry. But there is actual research behind this. No. Oh no, not that, the perception, not the actual intelligence. Oh my God, okay, carrying on. Studies find again and again that these things like gender or names or whatever, that they influence how people are perceived relating to their competence. So, for example, if you have a certain gender, name, appearance, look, educational background, cultural background, then maybe people will not even recommend you for a position because they think your competence is not good enough for the job. But even if your contacts recommend you a person who's perfect for the job, we are all biased ourselves. So even if we get a good suggestion from a far-off contact that objectively evaluates their contact's competence, we ourselves are still biased, and people tend to favor applicants that are similar to themselves. And this is what this slide is about. The way people present themselves, the nouns they use in an application, the way they shake your hand, the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they dress, all these things influence the way we perceive them. And we all unconsciously prefer people who remind us through the dress code, to the way they talk or walk, or shake our hands, of ourselves and of our own cultural educational background. And that's something that's really hard to challenge and to remind ourselves. And I saw a blog post of someone from a company a few weeks ago, and they said that, I don't remember the name, it doesn't matter actually. They said that they really want someone to firmly shake their hand, and then they know it's a good candidate. And actually, maybe you should question that, because what it tells you, if you base your evaluation of a candidate on things like shaking your hand, dressing, etc., what it means is that you're basically evaluating the candidate by their cultural, societal, educational background, which is summarized in the thing called habitus, which is a sociological term. Some of you may know it, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to know it. So social class is always present, subconsciously at least, and of course, those things are being influenced by our educational background, but not only the educational background of the applicants, but their family's background. Because people grow up in a certain environment and they learn how to behave, how to talk, etc. in a certain way. The educational background and the financial background of your family heavily shapes the music you like, if you prefer theater or cinema or Netflix or whatever. All these things are in some way or another influenced by the educational, financial, socioeconomic background of your family, and you can't really escape it. Size matters. Theoretically, network size is important, as is network diversity. I mean, it's logical. The more varied your contacts, and I mean varied in composition, structure, the way you use your contacts, the vaster the possible contacts that you can acquire through them. Well, statistically speaking, it's very simple. The bigger your network, the higher your chances that you find someone who's suitable for a job. In my research, I found something very interesting. I found that people who came from an academic background had a significantly larger network compared to people from a non-academic background. Plus, their network was usually more heterogeneous. So, and I don't mean like they knew more women or they knew different kinds of people. It means that they were better in keeping contacts from different spheres. Usually if you had someone who came from more working class, more non-academic background, they had a large portion of professional work contacts and maybe a few from the university or high school friends or whatever, and that was it. But people who came from more academic backgrounds, they had contacts from internships, from the side job they did with 16, the high school, all the different jobs they ever did, the soccer team, fan league, from Twitter, etc., etc. So they were somehow better at managing all kinds of different contacts all at once. And this means, of course, that you're more likely to find applicants from a privileged background through networks than through traditional and formal means, because usually people who come from a privileged background have a larger network, so it's more likely that you find them through your own network. At the same time, there was something else, and that is the emotional attachment. I asked the people if you could rate your contact on a scale from I don't care if I ever see that person again to I don't want to miss this person in my life ever again, how would you rate them? I found that people from academic backgrounds, they rated their contacts, especially their work contacts, over 50% higher than people did who came from a working class background. So they were somehow more emotionally attached to their work contacts. And I emphasize work contacts. This is not about family or your close personal friends, it's work contacts that we're talking about. So if work contacts are so important to some of us and less important to others, will that influence the way people, for example, aim for a promotion once they're hired? And I bet you it does, and let me explain you why. When I researched the way networks influence hiring and retention, I always ask my interviewees about the way how they would get a promotion, like who would you talk to, what would you do? And the answers were really interesting. For one, the difference wasn't really in the process. They would all merely go through their boss and talk with their boss about it. But the difference was in the approach and in the feeling of whether or not they were entitled to a promotion. I talked to someone who told me that they've been waiting for a promotion for years. They even got a university degree just for their promotion. They've been waiting to switch jobs for years. And they told me, well, I don't know what to do. All my colleagues, they bypass me and they get their promotions. And they told me, like, oh, you need to talk to the senior manager and you need to go and have lunch with them. And then they will recommend you for a promotion and then you get your promotion. And they even told me that this is how they got their own promotion. But when I asked them, okay, so why don't you do it? They said, it's not right. It's not fair. Like, you need to go through HR, through formal means. There is a process, and you need to follow that process. And if you don't do it, it's cheating. And that's not fair. That's not right. And surprisingly, this is something you hear quite a lot from people from a certain background. They grow up in a false sense of meritocracy, and they learn quite early on, from school on, that if they just work hard enough, they will get to where they should be. It's what we all get taught in society. Okay, sorry for the societal critique. But that's something we all grow up with, and it manifests in sayings like these. And and I'm going to say this very slowly. I heard that you need to say something for 15 seconds until it registers. So it's really, really important. So if you have something to write, you better write it down. If your HR processes are too strict, take too long, or rely heavily on personal recommendations, you're essentially excluding whole groups of people from your high potential and growth list. This is what this comes down to. The belief system is so steady, even if you take them out to lunch and tell them you know someone who can give them the promotion, they still will probably insist on keeping it in the official formal processes. On the other hand, you have the other extreme. Research shows that socioeconomic factors influence the way children get motivated, reinforced, and validated. And the way people can, or parents can motivate their children obviously links to how much time they have available, how much financial means they have available, etc. The more motivation, the better the performances of the children, sure, of course, logical, and the more normal or usual it gets for those children to be where they are at. And if you combine this with a system that perpetuates the meritocracy myth, you'll get an entitlement feedback loop that essentially goes on forever, which is very good for those people who are in the loop, but leaves other people behind. And this means that people think that everything that happens, any luck, any chance, is a sign of that they deserve it, that they deserve to be where they are at. And I've had people tell me in interviews that they got a job that was supposed to be for 5 or 7 years of experience, and they had like 1. And they got the job through a phone call of their boss. And when I asked them, like, did you have any help in your job search? They said, no, I did it all by myself. And they really meant it. They really believed that. It wasn't like they were lying on purpose. They actually believed that they achieved it all by themselves. And it's not about whether or not people deserve it. I mean, if you're good and you want to work, sure, go for it. I mean, as long as you have chances, you're supposed to take the chances. The thing is, it gets tricky when people don't realize that they have this privilege. When they are oblivious to the privilege and the positive starting things they have, that is when it gets tricky, because it hinders everything else. So once you have your employee or your promotion or your promoted employee or whatever, you're probably interested in keeping them on as long as possible, right? Because fluctuation is annoying and it's exhausting and nobody really likes that. So let's see what lessons can be learned concerning retention of employees when it comes to networks. And one thing I found is that the first bonds you make in a new environment are often those ones who stick for the longest time. So if you start a course or a learning degree, or even at this conference, the people you meet on the first day are probably the ones you talk to again tomorrow, because you only have a capacity to meet so many people, and same thing applies to companies. And I put there why your company should offer structured get-togethers, and I think that's something that can be really, really beneficial, especially if you're hiring people who are not yet as represented in your company as they should be, namely non-white, non-male, non-cis, non-able-bodied, whatever people, and if you already have people who are in a minority in your company and you hire new ones, a good thing you can do is introduce them to each other. Not to isolate a token group, but maybe to help them foster bonds with each other and to learn that they are not all by themselves, that they are not all alone, that they can meet other people, share their experiences, but also make sure that you introduce them to people from different hierarchies, from higher hierarchies, from lower hierarchies, from different departments. Try to give people a chance to meet as many new folks as they can, so they get settled in, and their own networks varies. You enable them to increase and diversify their network, and maybe even your own. No man's an island. This is not about Brexit, but sorry, I couldn't resist. There's this guy who's called Granovetter. He did a little study, which is the most cited sociological paper in history, and it's called The Strengths of Weak Ties. It's a network theory paper. And he said that the overlap between professional contacts and private contacts is one of the best documented facts in sociological research. And this is a little funny because it's coming from a researcher who excluded women from his own research because they were too unusual. Okay, to be fair, he did that in the late 60s, so you have to imagine a Mad Men scenario. But anyway, I had something very interesting happening to me because I wanted to check if there's professional and private overlaps in the networks. And I had literally hundreds of pages of transcribed interviews. And then I went through them and I gathered possible quotes and I found something. I realized, this is strange. I have not a single quote from a woman about how they really like their colleagues to be their friends. And this was really interesting because, of course, I've met some women who said, yeah, okay, my colleagues are my friends, sure. But usually when I took the quotes out of the interviews, the men were like, yeah, my colleagues, I consider them my friends. We often hang out after work and we drink beer in the office and we go to football, go watch a football play or whatever. And the women were like, I go home. I don't give a fuck. And this is really important because if you have team events or if your company culture relies on the fact that you sit all together at night after work and drink beer together, then you're possibly excluding 50% of your workforce, if you even have 50% of women. Probably you don't. Which leads me to this slide. I know this has been said a lot in recent talks, but I wanted to include it nevertheless because I think it's important. Company culture is not about drinks, so please stop advertising your jobs with free beer. If your team can't bond without them, without drinks, then please try again and get a grip. And neither is it about free massages or whatever. It's really not about that. It's the way you treat people, the way you support them, all the smart things Dorothy just said before. And drinks, well, there are many people who can't or won't or don't want to drink for a number of reasons, from health to religion to mood or just taste. And I think instead of maybe you doing the 10th team event where everyone gets drunk and you hope that as long as people are drunk, they kind of befriend each other, maybe instead do a breakfast or a brunch or a lunch together or like take a cooking class, do something in the middle of the day. And this is not only for women, but also for people who have children or have to take care of relatives or family or whoever, or people who simply don't want to mix up professional and private life so much because they've had negative experiences. Those people do exist. And it's even more important for minority groups. I hope this is burned into your brain. Too long, didn't listen. Oh, sorry, let me... Oh no, I messed up my grade. Oh no. This is, yeah, so anyway, that was totally on purpose. If you hire someone through your own networks, and you say like, I support this person because they remind me of myself, please take a moment, step back, and think about what you're saying. Because this is not you're supporting this person because they're cool or they're doing good work or they have potential. No, you're simply saying, they remind me of myself. And what basically a narcissistic thing to say? I support them because they remind me of my younger self. What? No, don't do that. Please check yourself. Check your networks. Are your networks varied? Do all your contacts have the same educational background, the same work background? Do they all share the same hobbies? Do they all, I don't know, spend their nights gaming or going to football plays or reading certain kinds of books? Do they all speak or dress the same way? And if the answer to any of those is yes, then it's an indicator that your network is too homogeneous. At least too homogeneous to find a varied sample of contacts for your hiring processes. Where's your bias? Are you supporting someone because they have a background that is familiar to you, that feels comfortable? I know often it's about, we say we want to hire people who fit into the team, but often that's an excuse to hire similar people who are already similar to the team. There might be like a certain edge if you hire people who are very different from your current team, but it doesn't mean they won't fit in. It just means that you have to put in some work to make them fit in and make them comfortable. So that's an important difference for you. And your processes, of course, are they too long? Are they very biased? Are they relying heavily on personal recommendations? Are your formal processes, what kind of keywords are you filtering in your CVs or in the cover letters? What kind of speech are you looking for? What kind of patterns are you looking for? Algorithms can be biased as well, so be sure to check on that too. In short, while hiring through networks can be incredibly rewarding, and I can say that because I also had jobs, got jobs through contacts before, it may also hinder your efforts in opening up the community, and hiring through networks can essentially work as a gatekeeping function. And nobody wants that, right? So in short, happy hiring, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you.